and welcome again to everyone to the Soft Skills Salon, your audible think tank on soft skills. I'm your host, Diana Kowarski, and I'm delighted to be here with another episode for you because, as we say here, conversation is the currency of communication. And in this episode, we are speaking with Billy Anderson. And Billy is a speaker, leadership coach, and author of Your Comfort Zone is Killing You. Previously, Billy was an advertising manager in Europe and Canada, a fundraising director for UNICEF, and a sugarcane farmer in Costa Rica. He has also spent 10 years leading wilderness trips for Outward Bound. Billy continually steps out of his comfort zone to test his courage. He's jumped out of an airplane 101 times. I'm assuming not the same airplane, but we can talk about that. And has traveled to 40 countries, including running with the bulls in Spain. And he's scared of the same things as everyone: failure, looking stupid, and not being liked. Hello, Billy Anderson. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. Real pumped to be here.
A real pleasure. Thanks for going through the questionnaire and for your selections. We're going to start our conversation with a remarkably popular question amongst all of ours in general. We've had a lot of feedback around this question being of value to our listeners, and it is, how do you define confidence? What comes to mind, Billy?
Sure. Yeah, I love this question. I highlighted like half of your questions, so it was hard to narrow it down. But then this one, I was like, yeah, that's the one.
Okay.
So what's interesting, when I see the word confidence, it's all inward for me. Whereas if you look it up, the definition online, it's confidence that something will go a certain way. And that didn't even cross my mind. It was more that self-confidence. But yeah, it's. I mean, I think in grand terms, it's confidence that things are going to work out, and that self-confidence, I think. Confidence starts with a self-belief, because we can be there's two types of confidence. There's confidence in our area of expertise because we've done it a bunch.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's this foundational or underlying confidence we can have, so that even if we don't know how to do something, we can be like, oh, whatever, we'll figure it out. And that is a level of self-belief that can help us be confident across different areas, even areas we're not familiar with. Does that make sense?
It does. And so to my thinking, that self-belief connects to some sort, perhaps variation of risk. Maybe I'm influenced by your interest in courage and the number of times you've jumped out of planes. But if you have a self-belief in something in a future sense coming to some fruition or some progression, there is an inherent risk there that we could be wrong. Does that make sense to you?
Totally. And I think that's where that self-belief comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Because you could be confident that something's going to work out, or confident that even if it doesn't work out, we're going to be okay, and we're going to figure it out. And all forms of confidence are good, but I think that one is the really great one. I think you can be more open-minded. Yeah, you mentioned courage, and funny, courage and confidence, they definitely overlap, right? You need a certain amount of confidence to be courageous. If you're going to be confident, you need courage. You need courage as well. And I say that courage is a muscle, and the more you use it, the more your comfort zone grows. And you could also say courage is a muscle. The more you use it, the more your confidence grows. Mm-hmm. But I do think it comes down to that self-belief, which has a million things underneath that. Agree, disagree? Yeah, what do you think?
So I'm not sure if I know of a specific definition, right? The original question is, how do you define confidence? And to your point, there's a life experience here. I don't believe that the dictionary meaning necessarily does the word justice, especially when we're looking in terms of our potential for development over time. The theme that I think I hear in your words is about a growth oriented mindset, just to, bring
For
in
sure.
Carol Dweck's work, right? And this idea that it will work out means that implicitly we are looking towards a next time, that there's an iterative approach, that there's some sort of accumulation, even though it might not be linear and clean, but that there's something on the horizon. And that's
Yep.
a huge area to think about in terms of confidence. Oftentimes, the opposite of a growth mindset, whether you want to call it fixed or if you want to call it a termed mindset, means we get bogged down in the immediate. And sometimes confidence is better served by recognizing what's happening right now might not be a full expression of my competencies, or I might not be representing myself as well as I know I could, or as well as I have prepared. But then
Right.
to think about there being another time. Does that
Yep.
connect with some of it?
Yeah. And in the moment, you can have the courage to feel that, or to step out of a comfort zone and do something that's scary. But that self-belief comes first in a lot of ways to know that that's going to work out. Right. And I believe at the root of self-belief is, our biggest fear, which is I'm not good enough and I don't matter.
Hmm.
And it's pretty impossible to be confident if you believe that, I'm not good enough and I don't matter. And we all feel that at some point. I feel it like every week at some point, but I catch myself. And so that foundational confidence or self-confidence, I mean, that goes back like everything to childhood. But what I find fascinating the more I coach leaders is good leadership at work and good parenting is the exact same thing. Anyway, so much comes back
Maybe.
to self-belief that our parents gave us or our early situations, and we can alter that, but that early stuff really has an impact.
Fair enough. And I have a colleague who likens parenting to leadership and makes reference to potentially people being taller, but that's about it. Um,
Yeah, totally.
and not even that, right? We come in different shapes, but yes, no, I
But
understand.
in one way, parenting, especially little kids, is
Mhm.
easier because you always know how they feel.
Mm,
Because they tell you, they throw something or they take a tantrum. It's like, well, at least we know how they feel. Whereas at work, it's like, oh, people are worried they can't show emotion or they've got to toe the line or whatever. They just don't know you don't know what people are actually ever thinking. And I've worked with senior leadership teams who are like, can you have a webinar with our people
mhm,
and find out what they actually think? Because they won't tell us.
mhm.
Whereas at least parents or little kids, oof, you always know how they feel.
Right, right. And if you're that parent, you have to then figure out what to do with that information, right?
Yep, yep. Oh
Um,
yeah, it's not easy.
So you mentioned self-belief a few times,
Yep,
and I have had previous conversations on this podcast with a few individuals who have mentioned self-awareness in a variety
yep,
of different ways being an integral part to personal development in a whole slew of applications. Is
yep.
there a relationship between self-belief and self-awareness that you and I can speak about? Or is there one at
Yeah,
all?
totally. Yeah, totally. I think so. And I think self-awareness, our ultimate goal in life is to become as self-aware as we possibly can.
Mm.
Um, and so you can't to self-belief, right, means you believe in yourself, you're confident in who you are. But that doesn't truly happen at a deep level without self-awareness. So I can go get my master's
Mhm.
in, I don't know, marketing and then apply for a marketing job. And I'm going to be confident because look at this piece of paper and look at the how much I learned.
Right.
Um, but without that self-awareness of what are my limiting beliefs, how do I get in my own way? I mean, if you spend enough time on self-awareness, you inevitably figure out what you are really good at. You figure out also what you suck at, and that's important too. But you
Mhm.
figure out what you're great at, and then the self belief happens. So I think to really get a deep level of self-belief, we have to be mildly obsessed our whole life with improving our self-awareness and continually to pull back layers because it never ends.
I'm I'm taken by that idea of it being a lifelong project in terms of self-awareness, because it certainly isn't a flipping of
Yeah.
a switch, right? It
No,
isn't.
it's forever.
I am now aware. It's much bigger than that. And the phrase that I am often asked to try and unpack for some of my clients is how to get out of one's own way in
Hmm.
terms of whether they are limiting beliefs or enlightening beliefs or biases, good, bad, neutral, and we all have all of those in some variation. So if there's some equation maybe that comes into mind here, it's self-awareness as an ongoing process, as you've described. And the byproduct is hopefully having some material or fodder, some property to have a belief about, if only to disqualify, as you said, that's not for me because of this valid
Sure.
reason, that valid reason, or that's absolutely for me, and to glom onto something. And then the third part, if I continue with that equation, would be the relationship between self belief and confidence. Is that a
Yeah,
train of
yes,
thought?
I think so. I think so. I think you put it really well. And I think especially the confidence around that self-confidence, which leads to a larger
Right.
sense of confidence. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Self-awareness to self-belief to confidence. Yeah, that makes sense.
All right. Awesome. And
Yeah.
then, I've had a debate previously, and I can't tell you that I feel it's ended. It's ongoing in my mind. So there's an ongoing debate where I was involved in a conversation that perhaps will be of interest to you as well. It was around confidence, and the idea was presented that confidence is a feeling, and that it is a feeling akin to our other feelings, which can be remarkably diverse. So I feel hungry, I feel sleepy, I feel dopey, I feel courageous, I feel bored, I feel confident. And if
Right.
it is a feeling, what do we do with that?
Right.
Is confidence a feeling? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess so. I've never thought about it like that. And it's yeah, maybe it must be a feeling because I'm a really confident person, but I still have moments where I don't feel confident, which
Right.
means you don't always just have it. So
Right.
as we become more confident, yeah, maybe we feel it more and more. No, that makes sense because people say I feel confident more than they say I have confidence.
Absolutely, they
Or
do.
I
Yeah.
think they do. Yeah, I think they do. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes, it does. It does. And if you replace, I feel sleepy with I feel confident, to your point, although it's debatable, I don't always feel sleepy. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't always feel confident, but it is a feeling. So the extension to that has me in this debate thinking, well, how is it that I either promote or quench my other feelings, right? If I feel
Right.
hungry, I seek out some
Yeah,
sustenance,
yeah, sure, sure.
right? So if I feel a lack of hunger, that means that I'm satiated. But with confidence, it's
Yeah,
the absence or the arrears of it that I'm trying to respond to, right?
right.
Uh,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
let me,
makes
by
sense.
extension, then ask you: is there a time that comes to mind that you can share with us about when you were feeling really confident? When do we turn it up to its most positive? Is there an experience that you've had where you think, yeah, I was really confident?
Yeah, so now as a full-time keynote speaker, I get that feeling once I start my talk. So when I'm up on a stage, and the bigger the stage, the more confident I feel. Bigger the stage, bigger the room, more people.
Yeah.
But I'm not confident before I go up. Like they're
Mhm.
reading out my bio, and my inner critic is like, "This isn't going to work. They know this stuff already. Look how goofy you are. You should have shaved that silly mustache." But as soon as I get up there and start talking, I'm talking about my stuff that I've done a lot of times. I know what I'm doing once I
Right.
get going, and oh yeah, just top of the world.
And so is there a momentum that has once it starts, or is it at a constant level for you once it starts?
For that short, like we're talking like an hour, right? A 1 hour talk. No, for that 1 hour, it's good the whole time, except for when I get to a part I've got to tell a story that makes me emotional. And
Mm,
one of my limiting beliefs is that, you know, men don't get emotional. And so with that, I know it's not true, but whatever, it's
mhm,
there.
mhm.
And so as I come up to the slide where I'm going to have to tell the story, I start losing a bit of confidence.
Fair enough.
And then after the talk, until people come up to me and tell me how much they like it and how much they got out of it and ask me questions,
Yeah.
I don't feel confident and I suffer what Brene Brown calls the vulnerability hangover.
Yeah.
Been really courageous and vulnerable up there. And I feel really confident while I do it because I'm in it. But then I step down and then I'm like, was that too much? Did they
Mm.
like it? Is this going to be the first time when it doesn't go well? And then my confidence goes down and someone comes and says, oh my gosh, I loved your talk. It changed my life. Confidence goes up. But then 5 more minutes goes and no one else comes up and talks to me. Confidence goes down again. And that's all day. I get sick after every big keynote because it's such a roller coaster.
Fair enough. You referred to that inner critic. What is the role of self-talk in your confidence?
Yeah, so it's huge. So number one, I call it few, it's not just me. So once people realize that we all have an inner critic, then it stops freezing them as much. It's like, oh, you've got that voice too. Every time you think about being courageous, it says this isn't going to work. You're not smart enough. Your opinion doesn't matter. You're a fake. They can see through it. Everybody has that, even like CEOs. Okay, I'm not weird. So once we realize that part, it's a little bit better. But yeah, that self talk. So I think it's healthy to figure out what's the main thing our inner critic says. It says a bunch of things. Mine says you're too selfish. And you give it a name. I give mine a name. My inner critic's name is Bill, because when I'm not being my full Billy self, I'm playing it safe and I'm being a Bill, which is what I went by until I turned 30. And then I went back to Billy, which I had as a kid. And I say, hey, Bill, what are you trying to tell me? And I consider that inner critic just that you're the voice to tell you the worst potential scenario that could happen, but then you decide whether that's realistic or not. So I say, hey, Bill, what are you trying to tell me? Okay, you
Mhm.
think this is going to work. I shouldn't tell that story. I shouldn't sing that song. Okay, thanks for the warning, but you know what? I'm ready for this. I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway.
Right.
And it's still there, and I still feel a bit of a lack of confidence until I get up there. But yeah, having that talk with Bill can help quite a bit.
So what I'm hearing is that inner critic, that there's a theme in you certainly depersonalizing and providing it a name or your
Yeah,
own variation of your own name, that there's a bit of meta thinking here. So you're doing some thinking about the thinking that's going on,
yeah,
and
sure. Good way to
or
put it.
trying to bring some perspective on that, because Bill is thinking one thing and potentially there's some cognitive dissonance because Bill E is thinking something else. And this is
Yep,
happening all at the
yep,
same time, right?
totally.
And of course, happening perhaps seconds before going in front of a large crowd of people.
Yep.
And of course, that's just how this works, right? We somehow speak to ourselves. Um, May I ask, at age 30, was there a particular inciting incident that inspired your both naming and renaming or unnaming? I'm not sure what the process was.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I've been on a kind of corporate like desk job track.
Yeah.
So because that's the neighborhood I grew up in, that's what my dad did. So I was working in advertising, because that seemed like a little bit more of a fun type of corporate job. But
Okay.
at 30, I was like, I'm done. This isn't for me. I've got these other dreams I want to do. And so I quit, which was huge because I'd gone to school for marketing. I like everything I was just going to do. I was going to be in advertising forever.
Right.
And at 30, I just realized, yeah, I'm not happy. I can't keep doing this, or I don't want to keep doing this. And then so I quit and I became an instructor for Outward Bound. So I led wilderness adventures.
Right.
So I went from working in a desk to working in a canoe. And it was like my inner critic, it was like the best day of his life. He's like, whoa, whoa, what are we doing? This is not what people do. Um, and so I felt like I was, without realizing it at the time, stepping into my more authentic self.
Hmm.
Um, and I volunteered at this kids camp. We had to write our names down. And I was like, I'm going back to Billy. So it's just a freeing thing and giving myself permission to be more myself.
Fantastic. And thank you for sharing that. It's a lovely story. I'm sure that it's also a great memory as well in terms of
Yeah,
delineating maybe a before and an after or versions. I'm reminded of this frequently, and I'm often amiss to remember. There's a social psychologist who suggests that we reflect upon our lives in either stages or phases,
sure.
and
Yeah,
it might be tied to a particular incident or a decade or an accomplishment or a failure or a
yeah.
relationship, etc. And so your story reminded me of that. By the time I was 30, I think I was on my fourth Diana, although my name hasn't changed. I was on
Yeah,
my
yeah, yeah, yeah.
fourth, and she was a bit more together because the third Diana had a really hard time in
Right,
my
right,
20s. But I
right.
always liked that idea of different versions of self.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's part of that self-awareness, never-ending journey we were talking about, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Or at least wanting one thing to end. Maybe that's
Yeah,
part of it. So
yeah.
let's jump to our next question that I think will be of probably just as much interest as the first one. And this one reads, "What is your favorite way?" So this is worded differently than the other questions that we offer
Right, right.
because it's saying you've got to cull through. We assume you've got ways. We're asking you, what is your favorite way to solve interpersonal conflicts or problems on either your team or a team? What comes to mind, Billy?
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. There's lots of different ways. My favorite way is to right away talk about values.
Oh.
Um, so conflict, I mean, it all comes from fear, but right, conflict, there's emotions involved, and it's not when we're at our smartest. So when we're in a conflict, yeah, that smart part of our brain is now full of adrenaline. We're not thinking straight, and that's where we say things that feel good in the moment, but they're the worst thing to say. So yeah, we've got the feelings on the right side of the brain, and then language on the left, and it's hard to bridge the gap, and that's why we sputter when we're frustrated. We don't know what to say. We start pulling in everything you've done wrong in the last 5 years because we don't know what's actually going on. And so I find values bridges the gap between the two sides of the brain. So
Hmm.
with my wife, for example, we're having a thing. We go right to our excuse me, right to our values card. So I carry mine around in my wallet, so the listeners can't see, but there you can see those are my values. Look at the camera there. There
I
they are.
see them. I see them.
So
Wow.
I have them in a laminated card. So it's so basically I would say, okay, I'll go first. I'll say which of my values I feel like are being stepped on here, and then you tell me which of your values you think I'm stepping on.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And it's amazing. It gets you to the root of the issue as far as your feelings go because you can't see it. You're too worked up. And
mm-hmm.
then maybe I look at the list and it's like, oh yeah, simplicity. That's what it is. I think you're complicating this. What about you? Which of your values? And what's great about that is then I'm not pointing the finger at you anymore in this conflict. I'm just talking about how it landed for me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you're telling it. So values I find incredibly helpful. Easy to forget in the moment if you're really worked up because your inner cave person comes out. But yeah, values are my favorite for sure.
What is the process then if I take this to the origin story of you determining your primary values or pillars, the ones that you are
Sure.
bringing forward? How did you determine what they are?
Yeah, I just did an assessment. I think it was part of my um, coach training in
Yeah.
the International Coach Federation. I think that was part of it. But yeah, we can just even Google, free values assessment. So you start with that, you get a list,
Hmm.
and then you spend the rest of your life tweaking that list, however much life is left.
Right.
Um, and so my values list is different than it was 5 years ago. But that's not because I changed. It's because I got more clear on what I care about.
Okay.
And we don't always know. And I find the first time people do their values list, especially if it's in a work atmosphere, there's a lot of quote unquote work stuff like accomplishment, success, hard work. And if you really love that stuff, perfect, put it in. But I found like, over time, people they want to take a value out and put in something like fun
Hmm.
or the
Hmm.
light of being or peace and calm or joy. Anyway, I can't even remember what your question was, but that's my answer.
That's a great.
Was I
That's
off? I don't.
Yeah. You're awesome. You're awesome. So the space between feeling and language, that right brain, left brain divide,
Yeah.
driving between the two, or perhaps building a bridge. You mentioned the values that
Yeah.
can be the starting point. So if we look at the values, and I think this is perhaps thematically in alignment with some of the meta thinking that you mentioned earlier. So there's also the insinuation here of depersonalizing. So we're
Mm,
looking now, if there's an interpersonal conflict between you and me, that I'm not
yeah.
telling you how I'm feeling, or that, you're a so and so, or blah blah blah, and
Yeah.
get in the moment. Instead, I'm focusing on this value here, asking you to come with me to understand this value over there, which is outside of both me and you. So there's this
Right.
depersonalizing yet again. So
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
mentioned the word calm. I think that process incites, inspires, and requires calm. Would you agree?
Totally. Totally. So, the world is a big, scary place, way less now than it was for 99.9999% of human existence. So we could control very little. And as kids, we can't control much. And so we're always scared of not having control. And so we feel this strong emotion and it feels out of control because we don't know what's actually going on. So
Mhm.
yes, like you said, you look at your list, you pick the value and it instantly calms us because it's like, oh, that's what's bugging me. Now I can do something about it. So there is a calming because it does help us feel like we're a bit more empowered. But yeah, there can be instant calming, even if we just identify it and don't go further, which we should. You then have the conversation, but just identifying it, it's like, oh, yeah, that's it. That's what's bugging me.
I really like the guttural shuddering effect of the sound as well. There's a lot there. I think
Yeah,
sometimes it's that sound that we are trying to make sense with some of
yeah.
the disagreements. So let me ask you then, in going back to our question around conflict, how do we know either that we are en route to a version of resolution, or that we have resolution based on what you shared so far?
Hmm. So resolution with another person in conflict.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, I'd say it's partly in how convincing you both seem, but not everyone has amazing um, empathy or soft skills. So you can't always read that. So it's in the conversation. It's asking,
Hmm.
hey, what's bothering you about this? How are you feeling now? So I think it's a lot in the quality of the questions. What would you like to see different here? Um, what can I do to help not make you feel this way again? Yeah, I feel like when we put other people's well-being at the forefront,
Hmm.
it's just going to go well. Like it's just going to go well. But yeah, then a check-in question of, how are you feeling about this? What else is, what else can we still talk about, or what else is still bugging you? Um, Yeah, and then you can just see it too, right? Like people are comfortable the more, if you can see them, the more they look like a kid. So if you're
Mm.
sitting there with your arms crossed, sitting up straight, person's not super comfortable. I remember coaching someone once and she was talking about something that she was uncomfortable about. Her arms were crossed, her legs were crossed. And then we got to an insight about herself and her childhood that she didn't even realize. And I looked at her and she's on a stool and she's sitting on her hands and her feet are kicking underneath the chair. So I looked for that. I'm like, how much of a kid does everybody look like? Which is another way to say how comfortable and relaxed the people look.
Yeah.
And if there's still a bit of tension, it's like, you get it. You call it out. Like, hey, you seem a bit tense. Is there something I'm missing, or is there something you'd like to say
Right.
that could be beneficial?
I love this idea. The more you look like a kid, the more comfortable you are. That speaks to so many aspects of presence and of intentional body language and of personal branding and a whole slew of things.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
for sure.
the piece, and this is timely in terms of many workplaces right now that I think we could talk about next, is so many organizations being in hybrid mode and or
Yeah,
considering geographically dispersed workplaces
yeah,
and forces, and or simply the use of cameras when we are
sure.
on an MS Teams or a Zoom or a WebEx. And this is, to my experience, different in North America than to my clients elsewhere. How do you
Okay.
look for those cues when you might have either colleagues or members of your team, if you're a leader, who keep their camera off and who are
Right,
working remotely? What do you think? How are we going to do this?
right. Yeah, so I found, and it was years of coaching others before I learned this. I get zero credit. It just kept slapping me in the face, and I found that in my opinion, whatever the body does, the voice is doing.
Hmm.
So I think if someone has their camera off, I think that's fine as long as they're talking. Um, because I know that, on like a mobile, like Zoom or MS Teams, whatever,
Yeah.
it is harder to feel comfortable because even though if you're on there with 20 people, you still feel like everyone's looking at you. And in a meeting room, you can tell they're not looking at you.
Right.
So I think Zoom makes it, these platforms make it harder. So I actually think, and that's why with coaching during COVID, I like the phone way better than Zoom because then all you do is focus. Because on Zoom, you're not getting the real them based on their posture. It's too self conscious. And I just find you can hear it. You can hear it in the voice. And if you watch for someone getting more animated, so like they start talking and they start moving their hands around. There's an emotion there, right? Let's talk about that. But you can hear it too. So, and at least on the phone, all you have to do is listen
Right.
rather than watch as well. So it's like, when is their volume going up or down, or when are they speaking slower or faster? Even just those, like, there's something there.
There is
Yeah.
absolutely intellectual property. There is insight in there, and it's interesting. I've spoken to a few coaches of late, and you and I talked about this before we started recording. The coaching world has evolved from my perspective in many ways, and I know you're um, hanging your hat on being a speaker right now, but certainly in drawing on your coaching experience as well.
Oh, for
That
sure.
many people who I know who offer coaching services at some point, if they're lucky early on, but eventually realize it's better done when we don't see each other.
Oh, so you agree, do you? Yeah.
That on the phone provides
Yeah, it's way better.
psychological safety for people to not be in a performance type
Yeah,
mode, and
agreed.
there can be some comfort. So, if you want to scratch yourself, you can, or if you're
Yeah.
walking around your home or hiding from your child or walking down the street. I remember having coaching clients years ago who were reluctant to go from any video platform. This was before Zoom. This was using WebEx, which was difficult.
Yeah.
But there was still video available, and we switched to the phone, and
Mhm.
it makes so much more sense for this one client to be walking wherever she so chose while she and I were working together. And it
Right.
took at least half of one session for me to say, do whatever you would physically like to be doing.
Right. Yeah.
I'm here to listen for the cues in your voice. And
Totally.
I spend that time as your servant, as your coach, as that person to, provide you assistance, actually listening. I will be able to know where we're headed. And if I'm uncertain, part of my role is to ask. I want to be
Yeah.
clear.
Totally.
I haven't gotten it. Please explain, which in and of itself can also be greatly facilitated in an audio only format. So
Yeah.
I'm not surprised that you came to that conclusion.
Well, I think it's great. It's been great for therapy. My wife's a psychotherapist, and therapy has been a bit more traditional. And
Mm,
pre-COVID, it's like, it's got to be in person. It's got to be in person. And then COVID proved that, no, you know what? It doesn't have to be. And obviously, it's up to the client and what they're most comfortable with. But it
certainly.
shows, like with coaching, it can be on the phone.
Yeah. And so as you can imagine, my extension, this podcast is audio only
Yeah.
because it's to be a part of some worlds for people as our listeners where, to be frank, they're not stuck looking at us.
Yeah. They're in the car. I'm going for a walk. I think it's fantastic.
Isn't that great? I want to begin as we wrap up our time together to make note, if I may, of a visual cue, even though we've just celebrated the audio, and that
Yeah.
is that I have met people before who personify having their heart on their sleeve. However,
Right.
I have noticed that you have your heart on your hand. Can I ask you to tell me about, I believe, maybe a tattoo?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a heart tattoo on my hand.
Okay. Is there a meaning to that?
Yeah. So in terms of self-belief, self-awareness, it was most of the vast majority of my life of not being willing to show weakness or vulnerability and just thinking that's the only way I'm going to be liked.
Okay.
And then did an intense psychedelic retreat last year and had a lot of insights, and that came really clear. So I want to be more emotional, share my feelings more. And so what's the best way to do that? Tattoo a heart on my hand so people ask about it.
There you
So
go.
now I can't hide from it. I got a tattoo to my hand.
So I'm delighted to have been of service in bringing you
Yeah, thank
another
you.
iteration. And congratulations if that is indeed a part of your own self-awareness journey, that
Mhm.
it is that conscious. And I would say to you that the self-awareness and the self-belief that we've talked about is also part of there being a deliberateness or a consciousness or a thoughtfulness as to both how one might be feeling as well as how one might be acting. Would you agree?
Yeah, we don't spend enough time on feeling and how we feel, and I think younger generations are getting better at it. But everything starts with the feeling, right? Everything starts with the feeling. But we've especially corporately, we feel like we got to solve, we got to fix. And it's like, no, let's first talk about how we're feeling about it, and then the solving is going to be easier.
Fair enough. So I can tell you that I'm feeling particularly good about this episode and
Yeah, it's been fun. Thank you.
grateful to you. Thank you for your time and for this conversation. And so hopefully our paths can cross again, Billy Anderson.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's been really fun.
Thank you very much for listening to another dynamic and informative episode of the Soft Skills Salon with your host, Diana Kowarski. Please consider subscribing to our show wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we also encourage you to visit our website and social media links, which you can find in the show's notes. We look forward to bringing you another episode. And remember, conversation is the currency of communication. Bye for now.